She never asked for a throne. She never asked for power. Yet in a world where she once walked unseen, something impossible began to happen. A single choice, a single bond, pulled dozens of broken lives together like they were never meant to be apart. But the real question was never about the cub, or the celebration, or even the pack that followed him with silent devotion. It was about her. The woman who believed she had no place anywhere, standing at the edge of a future she never dared to imagine. And realizing that sometimes home doesn't call your name. It waits for you to finally accept it. And in that quiet sunset, when the Alpha finally spoke just one word, everything changed forever. Nobody noticed when Ilara stopped eating lunch. Nobody noticed when she carried twice the work of others. Nobody noticed when her hands became rough from cold water and endless labor. And little by little she stopped expecting anyone to notice at all. Before the sun climbed above the distant mountains, she was already awake. The world outside remained dark and silent. A thin layer of mist rested across the sleeping territory. The forest stood still. The sky carried the final stars of the night. Ilara sat on the edge of her small bed and listened to the silence. Those few moments before work were the only moments that belonged to her. No orders, no requests, no voices calling her name. Only peace, only stillness. Then she stood and began another day. Her cottage sat far from the center of the pack. Forgotten. The wooden walls carried marks from many winters. The roof leaked whenever heavy rain arrived. The floor creaked beneath every step. Yet she never complained, because it was the only place where nobody expected anything from her. She wrapped a faded shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the cold morning air. The path toward the main settlement stretched ahead. As she walked, she watched smoke rise from chimneys. Families were waking. Children were laughing. Breakfast tables were filling. Warm lights glowed through windows. For a brief moment she wondered what it felt like to belong somewhere. Then she lowered her eyes and continued walking. The pack house became busy as soon as daylight appeared. Workers moved in every direction. Hunters prepared supplies. Guards changed shifts. Merchants arranged goods. Everyone had a place. Everyone had people waiting for them. Everyone except Ilara. Her tasks began immediately. She swept floors, carried water, washed clothes, cleaned storage rooms, delivered supplies, prepared kitchens, repaired broken tools, and completed countless small jobs nobody else wanted. Hours passed, then more hours. The work never seemed to end. People spoke to her often, but rarely to her as a person. Bring this, carry that, clean this, fix that. Simple commands, nothing more. Sometimes she wondered if anyone actually knew her favorite color, or what made her smile, or what frightened her at night. The answer was probably no. Near midday she carried a basket across the courtyard. A young servant hurried past and accidentally knocked into her shoulder. The basket slipped. Several items fell onto the ground. The young servant barely glanced back. No apology came. No offer to help. He simply continued walking. Ilara knelt and gathered everything herself. A few nearby people watched, then returned to their conversations. As if nothing had happened. She felt the familiar ache in her chest. Not anger, not resentment, just sadness. A quiet sadness that had followed her for years. Yet somehow her kindness remained. Perhaps because she understood loneliness too well. Perhaps because pain had taught her compassion. As she crossed the settlement later that afternoon, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry firewood. Without hesitation, Ilara stepped forward. "Let me help you." The woman smiled with surprise. "You have enough work already, child." "Maybe," Ilara replied softly. "But that does not make your burden lighter." Together they carried the wood. The woman thanked her several times. The gratitude warmed Ilara more than she expected, not because she needed praise, because kindness still mattered, even when few people saw it. As evening approached, she finally finished her duties. The sky glowed gold and amber. Long shadows stretched across the roads. Birds returned to their nests. The settlement slowly quieted. Ilara began the familiar walk home. She enjoyed this part of the day. The road passed through open fields before reaching the forest. The air felt cleaner there. The silence gentler. She could finally breathe. Halfway home she heard movement behind her. Soft footsteps. Steady. Measured. She glanced over her shoulder. A large gray wolf walked several paces behind her. Its golden eyes remained calm. Elara slowed. The wolf slowed. She stopped. The wolf stopped. For several seconds they stared at one another. Then she continued walking. The wolf followed. When she reached her cottage she turned around. The wolf sat quietly near the path, watching, waiting. Only after she stepped inside did it rise and disappear into the forest. Strange, she thought. Very strange. The next evening another wolf appeared. Then another. Then 3. Then 5. Days passed. The pattern continued. Different wolves. Different sizes. Different ages. Yet all behaved exactly the same. They escorted her home. Nothing more. Nothing less. The wolves never approached too closely. Never demanded attention. Never growled. Never acted aggressively. They simply followed. As though protecting her. Elara could not understand it. She had no special status. No important position. No influence. Why would wolves care where she went? The mystery deepened with every passing day. Soon people began noticing. Whispers spread through the settlement. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Curious eyes followed her movements. Some people looked suspicious. Others looked jealous. Many looked confused. One afternoon she overheard 2 workers speaking. It happened again yesterday. One said. 8 wolves followed her. The second worker frowned. Maybe she has some hidden gift. Or maybe she is hiding something. The first nodded slowly. Normal wolves do not behave like that. Elara quietly walked away before hearing more. The rumors unsettled her. Attention had never brought good things into her life. She preferred remaining invisible. Invisible felt safe. Invisible felt familiar. That evening she took a different route home hoping to avoid the wolves. Did not work. They found her anyway. 4 wolves emerged from the trees and calmly fell into step behind her. Elara sighed. You know I am not important enough for this. The wolves simply blinked. One tilted its head. Almost. For the first time in many days a small smile touched her lips. Back near the center of the territory the unusual reports eventually reached the Alpha King. He sat within the council hall reviewing documents. Several advisors stood nearby. A guard cleared his throat. There is something unusual we should mention, Alpha. The Alpha looked up. What is it? The guard hesitated. It concerns the servant girl named Elara. The Alpha waited patiently. 4 weeks wolves have been following her home. Every day. The Alpha raised an eyebrow. Following her. As Alpha. How many wolves? The numbers vary. Sometimes 3. Sometimes 10. Sometimes more. Silence filled the room. The Alpha considered the report. His reputation came from patience rather than quick judgment. Many strange stories grew larger every time they were repeated. Perhaps this was another example. Phil. The behavior sounded unusual. Do the wolves threaten anyone? No. Alpha. Cause disturbances? No. Alpha. The Alpha returned his attention to the documents. Then continue observing. Nothing more. The guard bowed. As you wish. Yet after the meeting ended the report remained in the Alpha King's thoughts. Why her? The question lingered. Without answer. Without explanation. Far away Elara knew nothing about these discussions. Her life continued exactly as before. Work. Silence. Loneliness. Strangeness. And wolves. Always wolves. Days turned into weeks. Autumn slowly deepened. The air became colder. The wind sharper. Dark clouds gathered more often above the mountains. One evening the sky looked different. Heavy. Restless. A storm was coming. Everyone could feel it. Merchants closed early. Families hurried indoors. Hunters returned before nightfall. Even the animals seemed uneasy. Elara finished her final task and began walking home. The wind pulled at her cloak. Leaves danced across the road. Thunder rumbled far in the distance. The wolves followed behind her as usual, 6 of them tonight. Silent shadows moving through fading light. The first drops of rain touched her face. Then more followed. The storm was arriving faster than expected. Elara quickened her pace. Lightning flashed across the sky. For a brief moment the entire forest turned silver. Then darkness returned. The wind howled between the trees. Rain began falling harder. She was almost home when she heard something. Faint sound. Weak. Broken. She stopped immediately. The wolves stopped too. The sound came again. Tiny cry. Barely audible beneath the storm. Her heart tightened. Slowly she turned toward a cluster of bushes near the roadside. Another cry reached her ears. Fear. Pain. Loneliness. All hidden inside that fragile sound. Elara stepped closer. Branches swayed violently in the wind. Rain soaked her hair. Thunder shook the sky. Then she saw it. A small cub curled beneath the bushes, shivering uncontrollably, completely alone. His clothes were soaked, his face pale, his eyes filled with fear. The child looked exhausted, as if he had been wandering for hours, maybe longer. The cub looked up at her, and in that single moment something changed. Because Elara knew that look. She knew what it meant to feel abandoned, to feel forgotten, to wonder if anyone was coming. The storm roared around them. The wolves stood silently behind her, and the frightened cub stared at her with desperate hope, as though she was the first safe thing he had seen all day. Elara slowly knelt beside him, her heart already making a choice before her mind could speak. And somewhere beyond the dark clouds, beyond the forest, beyond the sleeping territory, fate quietly began turning its first page. For a moment Elara forgot about the rain, forgot about the cold, forgot about the long day that had already drained every bit of strength from her body. All she could see was the cub, trembling, alone. The child looked no older than 6 years. His dark hair clung to his forehead. His cheeks had lost their color. His tiny hands shook from cold. The storm continued raging around them, yet he barely seemed aware of it. His eyes struggled to remain open. Elara slowly lowered herself to her knees. The wet ground soaked through her clothes immediately, but she did not care. The cub stared at her as though he was afraid she might disappear if he blinked. His lips trembled. "I got lost." The words came out weak and broken. A sharp ache moved through Elara's chest. "How long have you been out here?" The cub swallowed hard. "I do not know." His voice sounded smaller than the wind. Elara looked around. The forest had already become dangerous. Darkness was spreading quickly beneath the trees. The storm showed no sign of slowing. Thunder rolled across the mountains like distant drums. She knew what she should do. She should take the child directly back to the settlement. She should alert the guards. She should let someone with authority handle the situation. Yet when she looked at the cub she saw something worrying. His breathing seemed shallow. His skin felt unusually cold. And his body continued shaking even though he was trying his best to stay still. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The wolves behind her remained silent, watching, waiting, almost as if they understood the choice standing before her. The cub suddenly swayed. His eyes rolled slightly. Elara caught him before he could fall sideways. Fear rushed through her. "Whoa, not here. Not in this storm." She gently wrapped her arms around him. His body felt frighteningly cold. The decision came immediately. Without hesitation. Without debate. She lifted him into her arms. "You are coming with me." The cub looked up weakly. "Will I be in trouble?" The question nearly broke her heart. "Whoa," she whispered. "Not tonight." The journey to her cottage felt longer than ever before. Rain lashed against the trees. Wind pushed against them from every direction. Branches swayed overhead. The cub remained curled against her chest, too tired to speak, too exhausted to ask questions. The wolves followed closely now, not surrounding her, not crowding her, simply staying near. guarding the path through the storm. At last the small cottage appeared through the darkness. A warm light glowed faintly from the window. Relief washed over her. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The moment they entered, the cub began shivering even harder. His small body seemed unable to stop. Ilara quickly closed the door against the storm. Then she hurried toward the fireplace. "Please stay awake," she whispered while kneeling beside him. "Just a little longer." The cub nodded weakly. Ilara worked quickly. Dry wood, kindling, flint. A few moments later flames flickered to life. Golden light filled the room. The warmth spread slowly through the cottage. The cub stared at the fire with tired eyes, almost mesmerized. Ilara found the only blanket she owned and wrapped it around his shoulders, then another around his legs. The child looked swallowed by the fabric. She moved to a small cupboard. The contents made her heart sink. Very little food remained. A few vegetables, some bread, a small amount of dried meat she had been saving for several days. It was not much. Not enough for 2 people, especially not through a storm. Yet she never considered keeping it for herself. She prepared a simple meal and placed it before the cub. Slowly, the child stared at the bowl. A long silence followed. Then his eyes filled with tears. Ilara blinked with surprise. "What is wrong?" The cub lowered his gaze. "Nobody has ever given me the bigger portion before." The words hit harder than she expected. For several seconds she could not speak. Then she gently pushed the bowl closer. The child obeyed, slowly at first, then faster, hunger revealing itself with every bite. Outside the storm intensified. Rain hammered the roof. Wind rattled the walls. Thunder shook the windows. The cottage seemed tiny against the power of the night. Hours passed. The cub remained near the fire while Ilara checked his condition again and again. Something continued bothering her. The cold should have faded by now, yet it remained. His hands still felt chilled. His breathing remained uneven. A fever had begun to develop. Fear settled deeper inside her. Meanwhile, across the territory, alarms spread through the pack. Cub was missing. Search parties formed immediately. Guards carried lanterns into the darkness. Hunters joined the effort. Families gathered anxiously. Questions filled every conversation. Where had the child gone? When was he last seen? How far could he have traveled? The storm complicated everything. Tracks disappeared beneath rain. Scents washed away. Visibility dropped with every passing hour. Finding the cub became increasingly difficult. Far away in the council hall, the Alpha King received the report. The moment he learned a child was missing, his expression hardened. Not with anger, with concern. "Search every route leading toward the forest," he ordered calmly. "Double the patrols. Nobody returns until every possible trail is checked." The guards bowed immediately. At once, Alpha. The Alpha moved toward the window. Rain struck the glass in endless waves. A child alone in weather like this could not survive long. The thought stayed with him, heavy, uncomfortable. Back inside her cottage, Ilara sat beside the sleeping cub. The fire crackled softly. Shadows danced across the walls. For a brief moment the storm seemed far away. Then the child suddenly began coughing. A harsh, painful sound. Ilara immediately leaned forward. His skin felt hotter now, far hotter. The fever was rising. Her stomach tightened. "Whoa, please no." The cub shifted restlessly. His face twisted with discomfort. Even in sleep he seemed unable to find peace. Ilara knew she should seek help. Yet stepping outside now would be dangerous. The storm had become violent. Traveling through the forest at night might place both of them at risk. And if she carried him through the rain again, his condition could worsen. She felt trapped. Every choice seemed wrong. Every option carried danger. Hours crawled by. She remained awake beside him, adding wood to the fire, changing damp cloths, checking his temperature, listening to every breath. Outside, the wolves had not left. Several remained near the cottage despite the weather. Silent shadows beyond the windows. Waiting, watching, protecting. The sight should have felt strange. Instead it brought comfort. Near midnight a sudden knock startled her. Ilara froze. Another knock followed. Louder this time. She carefully opened the door. A pack patrol stood outside holding lanterns. Rain soaked their cloaks. Their expressions were serious. "Have you seen a missing cub?" one of them asked. Ilara's heart jumped. She glanced back toward the sleeping child. The patrol noticed immediately. Relief flashed across their faces. "You found him." The guard stepped forward. "We need to take him back." Ilara hesitated. Only briefly. But the guard noticed. "What is it?" She looked toward the cub again. His breathing remained uneven. His fever continued rising. "If he travels tonight, he may not survive the journey." The patrol exchanged uncertain looks. The storm howled between them. The situation was no longer simple. The guard frowned. "The Alpha ordered us to bring him home." Ilara swallowed. "I understand. But look at him." The guard entered and knelt beside the child. The moment he touched the cub, his expression changed. The fever was impossible to ignore. Silence filled the cottage. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The storm seemed to grow louder. Finally the guard stood. "We will report his condition. Until then keep him warm." Relief washed through Ilara. "Thank you." The patrol departed into the darkness. Their lanterns soon disappeared beyond the trees. Ilara closed the door and returned to the child's side. Yet her relief lasted only moments. Because when she touched his forehead again, the fever felt even hotter than before. Far hotter. The cub stirred weakly. A painful sound escaped his lips. And for the first time that night, real fear entered Ilara's heart. Something was happening. Something far worse than simple illness. The fire continued burning. The storm continued raging. And as the long night stretched endlessly forward, the child's condition began slipping beyond her reach, leaving Ilara staring helplessly at the one life she had chosen to protect, and wondering whether kindness was about to cost her everything. The night seemed endless. The storm showed no mercy. Rain crashed against the cottage roof with relentless force. Wind screamed through the trees. Thunder shook the earth beneath the small house. Yet none of it frightened Ilara as much as the child lying before her. The cub was getting worse. Much worse. His small body twisted beneath the blankets. His breathing came in uneven bursts. His skin burned with fever. Every time Ilara touched his forehead, she felt more fear than before. The heat was unnatural, dangerous. The kind of heat that stole strength from the body little by little. The kind that left people too weak to fight. She dipped another cloth into cool water and placed it gently across his forehead. For a moment he seemed calmer. Then another painful cough shook his small frame. Ilara closed her eyes. "Please hold on, please." The cub slowly opened his eyes. They were unfocused, lost somewhere between sleep and sickness. He looked at her as if trying to remember who she was. Then a weak smile appeared. "You stayed." The words were barely a whisper. Ilara felt her chest tighten. "Course I stayed." The cub blinked slowly. "Nobody stays." Silence filled the room. The simple words carried more weight than any storm. Ilara looked away for a moment, because she understood exactly what he meant. She remembered nights when she had wished someone would stay for her. Someone who would sit beside her. Someone who would tell her she mattered. Someone who would choose her. But nobody had come. Now this child looked at her with the same loneliness she had once carried. And suddenly leaving was impossible, even if she wanted to. The cub drifted back into restless sleep. The fire crackled softly nearby. Outside the wolves remained gathered around the cottage. More of them now. Their shadows moved beyond the rain-covered windows. Silent guardians standing watch through the darkness. Hours passed. The fever continued climbing. Ilara searched every remedy she knew, every herb, every treatment, every old piece of wisdom she had learned over the years. Nothing worked. Nothing changed. The illness kept growing. The storm kept raging, and hope began slipping through her fingers. Near dawn, the cub suddenly gasped. His body stiffened. A sharp, painful sound escaped his lips. Ilara immediately knelt beside him. Fear rushed through her like ice. His breathing was becoming shallow. Too shallow. The color was fading from his face. No. No. Her voice trembled. Stay with me. The cub did not answer. His eyes remained closed. His small chest barely moved. The room suddenly felt cold despite the fire. A terrible silence settled over everything. The kind of silence that appears before loss. Ilara's hands shook. Because deep down she knew what was happening. She had seen it before. Years ago. Long before she became a servant. Long before she learned to hide who she truly was. She had watched sickness take someone she loved. And she had been powerless to stop it. The memory returned now. Sharp. Painful. Unwanted. A younger version of herself kneeling beside another bed. Another fading life. Another desperate prayer. Back then she had possessed a gift. A rare gift. A dangerous gift. One she had hidden ever since. Not because it failed. Because it worked. The healing power inside her was unlike anything most people understood. Could save lives. But every use demanded a price. Strength. Energy. Vitality. The greater the healing, the greater the cost. Years ago people had feared what they could not understand. Some called it unnatural. Others called it dangerous. Eventually Ilara learned the safest thing was silence. The safest thing was hiding. And so she buried the gift deep inside herself. Never using it. Never speaking about it. Pretending it did not exist. Until now. Her eyes returned to the cub. His breathing weakened again. A terrible realization settled over her heart. Without help he would die. The truth stood before her. Simple, cruel, unavoidable. She could save him. Or she could protect herself. But she could not do both. The room felt impossibly quiet. Even the storm seemed distant now. As though the entire world was waiting. Waiting for her choice. Tears filled her eyes. Not because she feared death. Because she feared regret. She knew what it felt like to lose someone when there was still a chance to help. She could not live through that pain again. Slowly she reached for the child's hand. It felt frighteningly cold despite the fever. The contrast sent fear through her chest. The illness was consuming him. Time was running out. Ilara took a slow breath. Then another. And finally she whispered the words she had not spoken in years. I'm sorry. The apology was not for the cub. It was for herself. For the life she might lose. For the future she might never see. Then she closed her eyes. And released the power she had hidden for so long. Warmth immediately spread through her body. Not ordinary warmth. Something deeper. Something older. Golden light slowly appeared beneath her skin. Soft at first. Gentle. Like sunlight filtering through morning mist. The cottage glowed faintly. The fire seemed to dim beside it. Energy flowed from her hands into the child. The connection formed instantly. Ilara gasped. The cost arrived immediately. Pain shot through her body. Sharp. Intense. Relentless. Her muscles trembled. Her breath caught. Yet she did not stop. The golden light grew brighter. The cub remained motionless. For several terrifying moments nothing happened. Then his breathing deepened slightly. A tiny improvement. Small. Fragile. But real. Hope ignited inside her. Ilara pushed harder. More energy flowed outward. More strength left her body. The room spun. Her vision blurred. Still she continued. Sweat covered her forehead. Her hands shook violently. The power burned through her like wildfire. The cub's fever slowly began fading. Color returned to his face. His breathing steadied. Life was returning. But every sign of recovery came at a cost. Ilara felt weaker with each passing second. Her heart pounded painfully. Her legs trembled beneath her. Darkness pressed against the edges of her vision. The healing continued. Minutes felt like hours. The storm outside seemed worlds away. Only two people existed now. One fighting to survive. One sacrificing everything to save him. Finally the fever broke. Change was immediate. The child's breathing became calm, natural, steady. The dangerous heat vanished. His body relaxed beneath the blankets. Peace returned to his sleeping face. The illness was gone. The cub would live. Relief washed through Ilara. Powerful. Overwhelming. Child was safe. She had done it. She had saved him. A small smile appeared on her lips. Then her body gave out. The connection snapped. The golden light vanished. Ilara collapsed onto the floor. Pain surged through every part of her body. She tried to stand. Failed. She tried to call for help. No sound emerged. The room tilted dangerously. The firelight blurred. Everything felt distant, heavy, low. The healing had taken far more than she expected. Far more than she had left to give. Her breathing became shallow. Exhaustion settled into her bones. Not ordinary exhaustion. Something deeper. Something frightening. The kind that reaches the soul itself. Across the room the cub stirred. His eyes slowly opened. For the first time in hours they were clear. Healthy. Alive. He looked around in confusion. Then he saw Ilara lying on the floor. Panic immediately filled his face. He pushed himself upright. Ilara. His voice cracked. Ilara. She tried to answer. Tried to reassure him. But her body refused. The cub climbed from the bed and hurried to her side. His small hands touched her shoulder. Fear filled his eyes. Please wake up. The child shook gently. Please. You cannot leave. Not you. Not to. The words broke apart as tears appeared. Outside the storm continued raging. Yet something unusual was happening. More wolves had arrived. Dozens now surrounded the cottage. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Protective. They formed a silent circle around the home. Watching the darkness. Standing guard. As though they sensed something precious inside. Hours passed. Ilara drifted between consciousness and darkness. Sometimes she heard the cub speaking. Sometimes she heard rain. Sometimes nothing at all. The world became fragments. Broken pieces of sound and shadow. The child never left her side. Even when fear filled his eyes. Even when exhaustion pulled at him. He stayed. The same way she had stayed for him. Morning finally arrived. Gray light filtered through the clouds. The storm weakened at last. Faraway search parties continued combing the territory. Then one patrol discovered something unusual. Wolf tracks. Hundreds of them. All leading toward a single location. The cottage at the edge of the forest. The guards exchanged confused looks. Then followed the trail. As they approached they froze. Wolves surrounded the small house. More wolves than any of them had ever seen gathered in one place. Yet none acted aggressively. They simply watched, waiting, protecting. The guards slowly approached. The wolves parted without resistance, allowing them through. Inside they discovered a scene none of them expected. Healthy cub. A terrified child refusing to leave a servant's side. And Ilara unconscious on the floor. Ill. Weak. Barely breathing. The patrol leader stared in shock. What happened here? The cub looked up with tears still in his eyes. And spoke the words that would soon reach the Alpha King himself. She saved me. Then his voice broke. And now I think she is dying too. The room fell silent. Because everyone understood one thing. The mystery surrounding Ilara had just become something far bigger than anyone had imagined. And the Alpha King was about to learn the truth behind the servant girl every wolf seemed determined to protect. The news reached the Alpha King before the morning sun fully rose above the mountains. A missing cub had been found. Alive. Safe. But that was not the part that captured his attention. The part that made him set aside every report on his desk was what came next. The servant girl had collapsed saving the child. And dozens of wolves had gathered around her cottage through the storm. Not one. Not two. Dozens. The Alpha stood slowly from his chair. The council hall fell silent. Every person in the room watched him. The guard delivering the report swallowed nervously. Alpha. The wolves refused to leave. Even after we arrived. The Alpha stared toward the distant window. Rain still fell beyond the glass, though the storm had finally weakened. How is the cub? Alive. The guard answered. Weak but recovering. And the girl? The guard hesitated. The pause alone provided enough answer. The Alpha moved immediately. Prepare horses. I am going there myself. No one questioned the order. Within minutes he was riding through the wet forest roads. Several guards followed behind. Cold wind moved through the trees. Broken branches littered the ground. Signs of the storm appeared everywhere. Yet something felt strange. The deeper they traveled, the more wolves appeared. Standing between trees. Watching silently. Not threatening. Not fearful. Simply observing. The Alpha noticed every one of them. Their behavior made no sense. Wild instincts rarely united so perfectly. Yet these wolves all seemed focused on one place. One person. Lara. The name repeated itself inside his thoughts. A servant girl. Nothing more. At least that was what everyone believed. Soon the cottage came into view. The Alpha slowed his horse. For a moment even he struggled to believe what he saw. Wolves covered the clearing. Gray wolves, black wolves, brown wolves, old wolves carrying scars from countless winters. Young wolves barely entering adulthood. They surrounded the small cottage like silent guardians. No growling, no aggression, only watchfulness. The Alpha dismounted slowly. The wolves turned toward him. Then something unexpected happened. They stepped aside, making a path, as though they had been waiting for him. The Alpha exchanged a glance with one of his guards. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. Inside the cottage, warmth still lingered from the dying fire. The room carried signs of a desperate night. Wet blankets, empty water bowls, medicinal herbs scattered across a table. Evidence of someone who had fought tirelessly to save a life. The cub sat beside a bed near the wall. The moment he saw the Alpha, his eyes filled with relief. Alpha, the child whispered. The Alpha knelt beside him. You're safe now. The cub nodded, then immediately looked toward the bed. His attention never wandered far from the figure resting there. The Alpha followed his gaze, and finally saw her. Lara. She looked smaller than he expected. Fragile, ill, motionless. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Her breathing was faint, almost too faint. For several moments the Alpha simply watched. Something about the scene unsettled him. Not because of mystery, because of sacrifice. The room told a story without needing words. Child had survived. The girl had paid the price. One of the guards stepped forward. The healer is on the way, Alpha. But the Alpha answered quietly. The cub suddenly reached for his sleeve. She saved me, Child said. His voice trembled. The Alpha turned toward him. Tell me what happened. The cub explained everything. Getting lost, the storm, the cold, the cottage, the warmth, the food, the long night, and finally the strange golden light. As the story unfolded, silence settled across the room. The Alpha listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing. When the cub finished speaking, tears filled his eyes. I think she gave her strength to me. The child whispered. I think she used all of it. The Alpha looked toward Lara again. His expression softened. Then the healer arrived. An elderly woman with silver hair and wise eyes. She moved directly toward the bed. Years of experience showed in every movement. Steady, certain. The room remained silent while she examined Lara. Minutes passed. Long minutes. Finally the healer stepped back. Well, one of the guards asked nervously. The healer looked toward the Alpha. She is alive. Relief spread through the room. But the healer was not finished. Barely. The relief vanished just as quickly. The Alpha folded his arms. Explain. The healer studied Lara carefully. This was not illness. This was sacrifice. She used an enormous amount of healing energy. Far beyond what most people could survive. Several guards exchanged confused looks. Healing energy. The healer nodded. A rare gift. Extremely rare. The Alpha remained silent. The pieces were beginning to fit together. The wolves, the loyalty, the strange protection. Perhaps there had always been more to Ilara than anyone realized. The healer looked toward the doorway where several wolves could still be seen beyond the windows. Animals understand things people often miss. The Alpha followed her gaze. What do you mean? The healer smiled faintly. Wolves are drawn toward safety, toward compassion, toward those who protect others. Long before we recognize goodness, they often recognize it themselves. The words settled heavily inside the room. Suddenly the mystery no longer felt impossible. The Alpha remembered every report he had dismissed, every strange story he had ignored. Perhaps the wolves had never been acting strangely. Perhaps they had simply been seeing something everyone else overlooked. The rest of that day passed quickly. Ilara was carefully transported from the cottage to the healing residence near the center of the territory. The journey was slow. Every precaution was taken. The cub refused to leave her side. Whenever healers attempted to separate them, the child immediately protested. She stayed with me. Now I stay with her. The determination in his voice surprised everyone, even the Alpha. Eventually no one argued. The child remained. Meanwhile whispers spread throughout the territory. The truth traveled faster than the storm ever had. The servant girl had saved the missing cub. The servant girl possessed a healing gift. The servant girl nearly died protecting someone she barely knew. People who had ignored her suddenly remembered her name. People who barely noticed her existence now spoke about her constantly. The Alpha heard every rumor, yet he cared little for gossip. Facts interested him more. And so he began asking questions. Quiet questions. Careful questions. Questions about Ilara's life. The answers disturbed him. He learned she worked harder than most servants. He learned she rarely complained. He learned she often gave away food despite having little herself. He learned she helped elderly pack members without being asked. He learned she repaired broken belongings and never accepted payment. Story after story emerged. Small acts of kindness. Hundreds of them. Tiny moments nobody considered important at the time. Yet together they painted a picture. Not of someone seeking praise, but of someone who genuinely cared. The Alpha sat alone that evening reviewing everything he had learned. A strange feeling settled inside him. Regret. Not personal regret. Something broader. The regret of realizing an entire community had failed someone. Failed to see someone. Failed to value someone. While wolves had understood her worth all along. Outside the residence night slowly returned. The storm clouds finally disappeared. Stars emerged above the territory. Peace settled across the land. Inside one quiet room Ilara remained asleep. The cub rested nearby in a chair much too large for him. Several healers moved quietly through the room. And outside the building wolves continued gathering. Not as many as before, but enough. Enough to show they had not forgotten. The Alpha stood near the window watching them. The healer joined him. You are thinking too much, she said gently. The Alpha almost smiled. Perhaps. The healer looked toward the sleeping girl. She has a strong spirit. Stronger than she knows. Will she wake up? The healer remained silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. Believe so. The answer should have eased his mind. Yet something remained. Question. The same question that had followed him from the beginning. Why her? Not why the wolves followed her. He understood that now. But why had someone so kind spent years invisible? Why had nobody noticed? Why had she carried so much alone? The healer seemed to read his thoughts. Sometimes, she said softly, the people who give the most are the easiest to overlook. Because they never demand attention. The Alpha looked toward Ilara. Ill. Silent. Fighting her battle in sleep. For the first time he felt something unexpected. Respect. Deep respect. Not because she possessed a rare gift. Not because she saved a child. but because she had remained kind despite every reason not to be. That strength was rarer than any power. The room fell quiet again. Then suddenly the cub sat upright. Everyone turned. The child was staring toward the bed. Hope filled his eyes. "Alpha," he whispered. The alpha stepped closer. "What is it?" The cub pointed. Tiny movement, barely noticeable, yet unmistakable. Ilara's fingers had moved. Only slightly. Only for a second. But after days of silence it felt enormous. The healer immediately hurried forward. A smile slowly appeared on her face. The first real smile anyone had seen from her all day. The alpha felt something inside his chest loosen. Relief. Quiet but genuine. The battle was not over. Not yet. But for the first time since entering that cottage, Hope no longer felt distant. And as moonlight spilled softly through the window, the Alpha King found himself wondering whether the wolves had recognized something valuable long before he ever had. Something precious. Something rare. Something worth protecting. And for the first time, he intended to find out. When Ilara finally opened her eyes, the world felt unfamiliar. Soft sunlight spilled through wide windows. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers into the room. Clean white curtains moved quietly in the morning light. For several moments she simply stared upward, confused, disoriented, unsure where she was. The last thing she remembered was the storm, the cup, the fever, the golden light, then darkness. A deep exhaustion still rested inside her body, yet she was alive. Slowly she turned her head. The movement felt difficult, as though her muscles had forgotten how to obey. Then she saw him, the cup, curled up asleep in a chair beside her bed. His head rested awkwardly against the armrest. One small hand still stretched toward her blanket, as if he had fallen asleep while making sure she remained there. A strange warmth touched her heart. The child looked healthy now. His cheeks carried color. His breathing was calm. The fever was gone. Relief flooded through her. The sacrifice had been worth it. Every bit of it. Before she could think further, the cub suddenly stirred. His eyes blinked open. For 1 second confusion crossed his face. Then he saw her. The chair nearly tipped over as he jumped to his feet. "You are awake." His voice cracked with excitement. "You are awake." A smile appeared on Ilara's face before she could stop it. "I suppose I am." The cub's eyes immediately filled with tears. "You scared me." The honesty of the words struck her deeply. The child hurried closer. "For days everyone said you would wake up soon. But you did not. And I thought." His voice broke. Ilara gently reached out. The simple gesture stopped him. "I am here now." The cub nodded quickly, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away. The door opened moments later. The healer entered. Her silver hair caught the sunlight. The moment she noticed Ilara awake, her expression softened. "Well," she said quietly, "it seems you finally decided to return." Ilara tried to sit up. The healer immediately shook her head. Slowly. "You have already caused enough worry." A faint laugh escaped Ilara. The sound surprised even her. It had been a long time since she laughed. The healer checked her condition carefully. Her pulse, her breathing, the strength returning to her body. After several minutes she appeared satisfied. "You survived something most people would not," the healer said. "You need rest. More rest than you realize." Ilara lowered her eyes. The memory returned. The healing. The energy leaving her body. Fear. Choice. "Would you do it again?" the healer asked unexpectedly. The answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The healer smiled. "That is what I expected." Later that afternoon another visitor arrived. The Alpha King. Ilara immediately became tense. Instinctively she tried sitting straighter. The Alpha noticed. "You do not need to do that." His voice remained calm, gentle, without command, without pressure. Ilara studied him carefully. This was the ruler everyone respected. The strongest wolf in the territory. Yet there was no arrogance in his expression. No superiority. Only concern. The Alpha stood near the window rather than approaching her bed, giving her space. The gesture did not go unnoticed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired," Ilara admitted. "But better." The Alpha nodded. "The healer says your recovery is progressing well." A brief silence followed. Not uncomfortable, simply quiet. Then Ilara looked toward him. "The cub, is he truly all right?" The Alpha glanced toward the child who sat nearby drawing pictures. "He is healthy, thanks to you." The words settled gently between them. Lara looked away. She never knew how to accept gratitude. The Alpha seemed to understand. "You saved a life," he continued. "That matters." The conversation ended there. No dramatic speeches. No endless praise. Only simple truth. And strangely that felt easier to accept. The days that followed brought steady change. Recovery came slowly. Much slower than Ilara expected. Some mornings she felt strong enough to walk through the gardens. Other mornings even standing seemed exhausting. The healer refused to let her push herself too hard. To Ilara's frustration, the cub supported every restriction. Whenever she attempted doing more than allowed, he immediately appeared. "You need rest," he would declare proudly. The healer said so. Soon the entire residence became familiar with their arguments, which rarely lasted long because the cub was surprisingly stubborn. One afternoon Ilara sat beneath a large oak tree within the healing gardens. Golden sunlight filtered through the leaves. Birds sang nearby. For the first time in years she felt no pressure to rush somewhere. No list of chores waited for her. No endless responsibilities demanded attention. The feeling was strange, almost uncomfortable. The cub sat beside her carving shapes into a small piece of wood. After several minutes he spoke. "When you get better, will you leave?" The question caught her off guard. Ilara looked down. The child avoided her gaze, pretending to focus on the wood. His fear was obvious. The possibility of losing her frightened him. She understood that, because losing people frightened her too. "I do not know," she answered honestly. The cub became quiet, very quiet. The kind of silence children create when they are trying not to cry. Ilara's heart softened. She gently touched his shoulder. "I am not leaving today." The cub immediately relaxed. For now that answer was enough. Meanwhile something unusual continued happening throughout the territory. The wolves kept gathering around her. Not in overwhelming numbers anymore, but regularly, naturally. Every morning several appeared near the residence. Every evening more arrived. Sometimes they rested beneath trees. Sometimes they followed her walks through the gardens. Always respectful. Always calm. Never demanding attention. The behavior fascinated everyone, including the Alpha. One evening he stood beside the healer watching 3 wolves rest peacefully near Ilara. She was reading with the cub nearby. The animals appeared completely content simply remaining close. "They trust her," the Alpha observed. The healer smiled. "Trust is not quite the right word." "Then what is?" "Recognition." The Alpha looked toward her. The healer folded her hands. "Animals recognize what people often ignore. Safety, compassion, patience. They feel those things." The Alpha returned his attention to Ilara. The explanation felt simple, yet strangely powerful. As the weeks passed he found himself spending more time speaking with her. Never forcing conversation. Never demanding answers. Simply talking. Sometimes about the territory. Sometimes about books. Sometimes about nothing important at all. The interactions remained easy, comfortable. One evening they walked through the gardens while the sun disappeared behind distant hills. The cub raced ahead chasing fireflies. His laughter echoed through the evening air. The Alpha watched him for a moment. "He adores you." Ilara smiled softly. "I adore him too." The honesty surprised them both. The Alpha nodded. He knew. Anyone with eyes could see it. The child followed her everywhere. Asked for her before sleeping. Looked for her first thing every morning. Family had formed quietly between them. Without effort. Without planning. Without anyone realizing it. The Alpha glanced toward her. You are different around him. Elara looked curious. Different how? Lighter. The answer arrived immediately, as though he had been thinking it for some time. You smile more. For a moment she said nothing. Then she looked toward the cub again. Maybe because he makes it easy. The alpha smiled. I think you do the same for him. The words lingered between them. Warm. Gentle. True. Days continued passing. The territory slowly returned to normal. Yet Elara's life no longer resembled the lonely existence she once knew. People greeted her now. Not because of rumors. Because they had finally begun seeing her. Children waved when she passed. Elders thanked her for past kindnesses they had never properly acknowledged. Even servants she once worked beside treated her differently. The attention still felt strange, but no longer painful. One afternoon the healer joined her beneath the oak tree. The old woman carried her usual knowing smile. You are happier, the healer said. The healer nodded. You spend less time preparing for disappointment. The words struck deeper than expected. Elara stared toward the distant mountains. Perhaps the healer was right. For years she had expected nothing, needed nothing, trusted nobody, because expecting kindness often led to heartbreak. Yet slowly that belief was changing. The cub changed it. The healer changed it. Even the alpha changed it. Not through grand gestures, through consistency, through patience, through simple acts repeated day after day. The healer studied her carefully. What are you afraid of? The question came quietly. Elara answered after a long pause. That it will disappear. The healer nodded slowly. A reasonable fear. Then she smiled. But fear does not decide the future. That night Elara stood near her window watching moonlight cover the gardens. The territory slept peacefully beyond the walls. Several wolves rested beneath nearby trees. The familiar sight brought comfort now. Not confusion, not embarrassment, comfort. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. The cub appeared carrying a blanket. You forgot this, he announced proudly. Elara laughed softly. Thank you. The child hesitated, then wrapped his arms around her. The hug came unexpectedly, natural, unplanned. For a moment Elara froze. Then she slowly returned it. Something shifted inside her heart. Place long empty. Place long cold. Warmth finally reached it. The cub stepped back smiling. Good night, she whispered. After he left, Elara remained standing beside the window. The moonlight silvered the world outside. The wolves rested peacefully. The gardens swayed softly in the night breeze. And for the first time in many years she realized something important. The loneliness that had followed her for so long no longer felt endless. Because somewhere along the way, without noticing, without expecting, without asking, she had begun finding a home. And though she was not yet ready to admit it aloud, a quiet part of her no longer wanted to face the future alone. Winter arrived quietly, not with violence, not with storms, but with soft mornings and silver frosts spread across the earth. The mountains wore white crowns. The forests shimmered beneath pale sunlight. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout the territory. And life continued moving forward. For the first time in many years Elara found herself slowing down enough to notice these things. Before she had always been rushing, always working, always surviving. Now she had time to breathe, time to watch snowflakes drift through the air, time to sit beside a window with a warm cup of tea, time to simply exist. Yet even as happiness slowly entered her life, another feeling remained: uncertainty. Because healing the heart was not as simple as healing the body. The wounds inside her had existed for years, some for most of her life. They did not disappear overnight. One morning Elara stood beside the frozen lake near the edge of the territory. The surface reflected the pale winter sky. Everything seemed peaceful, silent. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders and watched her reflection in the ice. Sometimes she hardly recognized herself anymore. The lonely servant girl who expected nothing from anyone felt distant. Yet she had not disappeared completely. Pieces of her remained. The part that expected disappointment. The part that feared losing everything. The part that still wondered whether she truly belonged. Footsteps approached behind her. Steady. Unhurried. She already knew who it was. The Alpha stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt comfortable, like an old friend. After a while he looked across the frozen lake. It is beautiful here. Lara nodded. It is. The Alpha folded his arms. You have been thinking too much. A small smile touched her lips. The healer says the same thing. Then perhaps she is wise. She laughed softly. The sound disappeared into the cold air. The Alpha studied her for a moment. You seem troubled. Ilara looked down at the ice. How do you know when something is real? The question surprised even her. The Alpha remained thoughtful. Real. He repeated quietly. Yes. How do you know kindness will stay? How do you know people will not change? How do you know a home will remain a home? The Alpha understood immediately. The fear beneath the words was obvious. He took his time answering. You do not. Ilara looked up. You cannot know the future. He continued. None of us can. But trust is not built from certainty. It is built from choice. Every day. Again and again. His voice remained calm, steady, like the winter mountains surrounding them. The people who care about you choose it every day. Not because they must, because they want to. The words settled deep inside her heart. The Alpha looked toward the horizon. And for what it is worth, you have become important to many people. More than you realize. Neither spoke after that. They simply stood together watching sunlight move across the snow. And somehow that silence said more than words ever could. As winter continued, the territory prepared for the midwinter gathering, one of the largest celebrations of the year. Families decorated homes. Children practiced songs. Merchants filled market stalls with colorful goods. Excitement spread everywhere. The cub especially seemed incapable of discussing anything else. Every day he discovered something new to be excited about. Every day he brought another question. Every day he somehow convinced Ilara to smile. On the morning of the festival, he appeared at her door before sunrise. His eyes practically sparkled. You promised. Promised what? Ilara asked while pretending confusion. The cub gasped dramatically. You promised we would see everything. Every stall. Every lantern. Every performance. Everything. Ilara laughed. I remember. But the child grabbed her hand. 'Cause I made a list. Course you did. By afternoon the territory looked transformed. Lanterns hung from every building. Music drifted through the streets. Children ran through the snow. Families gathered around fires. The entire settlement glowed with warmth. Ilara walked through the crowd beside the cub. For a while she simply observed. People smiling. People laughing. People living. Years ago she would have passed through a gathering like this unnoticed. Invisible. Now greetings followed her everywhere. Not because of obligation. Because people genuinely wanted to speak with her. An elderly woman hugged her. Several children waved enthusiastically. Merchants offered warm drinks. The change still felt surreal. The cub noticed her expression. What is wrong? Nothing. Ilara answered softly. I was just thinking. About what? She looked around. About how different everything feels. The cub smiled. That is because everyone finally figured out what I already knew. And what is that? That you are impossible not to love. The answer arrived so quickly and sincerely that Ilara stopped walking. Emotion filled her chest. Unexpected. Powerful. The cub immediately looked worried. Did I say something wrong? Well, she whispered. Nothing wrong. As evening approached, the celebration moved toward the central square. Large fires burned brightly. Snowflakes drifted through golden light. The entire territory gathered together. The atmosphere felt almost magical. Ilara stood near the edge of the crowd watching everything. For once she did not feel alone within it. The Alpha joined her a short time later. The cub was currently occupied trying to eat far too many festival sweets. A battle he appeared determined to win. The sight made them both smile. The Alpha looked toward the people gathered around the square. They are happy you are here. Ilara followed his gaze. I never imagined hearing that. The Alpha turned toward her. There is something I wish to ask. Her heartbeat quickened slightly. Not from fear. From uncertainty. The Alpha remained calm. As always, careful, respectful, giving her space even now. You do not have to answer tonight, he said, or tomorrow, or next week. Take whatever time you need. Ilara waited. The Alpha's voice softened. You have a place here, with this pack, with the people who care about you. His eyes remained steady. And if you wish, you have a place with me as well. No pressure, no expectations, no demands, only truth. The simplicity of it made the moment even more powerful. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic speech, only an honest offer, one built on patience, trust, respect, the very things that had brought them here. Ilara felt emotion rise inside her, not because she was surprised. Part of her had known this moment would eventually come, but because for the first time in her life the choice belonged entirely to her. Nobody was deciding her future. Nobody was forcing her path. She was free. Free to leave. Free to stay. Free to choose happiness. The realization changed everything. That night she walked alone through the quiet territory after the celebration ended. Snow covered the roads. Moonlight painted the world silver. Several wolves followed at a respectful distance. The familiar companions who had walked behind her for so many months, perhaps longer than she realized. Ilara smiled softly. The sight no longer confused her. Now she understood. They had never followed power, or status, or gifts. They had followed kindness. The very thing she almost stopped believing mattered. Eventually she reached the hill overlooking the territory. The lights below glowed warmly in the darkness. Homes, families, laughter, belonging. For years she had looked at places like this from the outside, always watching, never part of them. But something had changed. The healer's wisdom, the cub's love, the Alpha's patience, the wolf's loyalty. All of it had slowly healed the broken places inside her. The answer became clear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, simply clear. The next morning she found the Alpha in the gardens. Snow rested lightly across the ground. Winter sunlight shimmered through bare branches. The Alpha looked up as she approached. Immediately he saw something different in her expression. The kind that comes after a long journey. Ilara stopped in front of him. For a moment neither spoke. Then she smiled. Real smile. The kind that reached her eyes. I made my choice. The Alpha waited patiently, never rushing, never assuming. Ilara looked around the territory, the gardens, the buildings, the people moving through the distance, at everything she once believed could never belong to her. Then she looked back at him. I want to stay. The words felt simple, yet they carried years of pain and healing inside them. The Alpha smiled. Not triumph, not victory, only happiness, quiet genuine happiness. The kind that cannot be forced. The kind that must be earned. At that exact moment a familiar voice interrupted them. I knew it. The cub came racing across the garden, nearly slipping in the snow. Absolutely knew it. Ilara laughed as the child wrapped his arms around her. The Alpha shook his head with amusement. The cub looked between them proudly. Everything worked out. Neither adult argued. Because somehow he was right. Weeks later life settled into a new rhythm. Peaceful, warm, steady. Ilara no longer lived on the edge of the territory alone. The cottage remained, a reminder of where her journey began. But now she had people waiting for her. People who cared whether she ate, whether she smiled, whether she was happy. The cub continued finding reasons to visit every day, usually several times each day. The Alpha remained patient and constant, never trying to become more than she was ready for, allowing trust to grow naturally, allowing love to arrive in its own time. And the wolves never stopped following her home. Even now, months later, A few always appeared during the evening walk, walking quietly behind her, guarding the path, making sure she arrived safely. One evening Ilara paused before entering her home. The wolves waited nearby. The sky glowed gold with sunset. The world felt peaceful. Oh, complete. She looked back at her silent companions, then toward the territory she now called home, and finally toward the future waiting ahead. For the first time in her life she was not merely tolerated. She was cherished, not merely accepted. She belonged. And as warm light spilled from the windows behind her and laughter echoed somewhere in the distance, Ilara stepped forward into the life she had chosen. A life built not on fate alone, but on kindness, trust, patience, and love. The kind of love that stays. The kind of love that waits.